seated. So, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this public seminar for AIIB's 10th annual meeting on the topic of investing in nature, mainstreaming biodiversity in infrastructure investments. It's really a pleasure and wonderful to see so many of you are here. First of all, I'd like to first give a quick introduction of our speakers so that we get everything arranged, then we can kickstart. It's really a big pleasure for us to have this distinguished panel that we have four prominent speakers who are really practicing in this very important field, the nature and biodiversity. So first, let me introduce Ms. Steintje van Veldhoven. Ms. Steintje van Veldhoven is Vice President and Regional Director for WRI Europe. Steintje has been a prominent Dutch politician and most recently serving as a member of Cabinet of Netherlands, responsible for public transport and environment, and also as Minister for Environment and Housing. She has been a Member of Parliament and an international diplomat representing the Dutch government in the European Union in Brussels and has been working with the European Commission and Directorate General Research and Development. Steintje has had long-standing involvement in environment issues, especially related to climate change, energy, and circular economy. It is our pleasure to have you here, Mr. Steintje. Please take your seat. Now, let's also welcome Ms. Rachel Biederman. Ms. Rachel Biederman is a Senior Vice President for America's Field Division at Conservation International. Rachel is also a AIIB's IAP member. She oversees Conservation International's work in the South America region, leading the strategies and outcomes in 6 countries and in Amazon biome. Most of her career has been focused on climate change and forests, helping support and create networks across environment and agriculture sectors and connecting Brazil to international policy processes. She has also integrated her interest in gender and women's empowerment into her programs and initiatives. So welcome, Rachel. Please take your seat. Next, it's also my pleasure to introduce Mr. Nelson Barbosa. Mr. Nelson Barbosa is a Director of Planning and Institutional Relations at the Brazilian National Development Bank. He holds a PhD in economics and is a full professor of public policies at the Getúlio Vargas Foundation and an associate professor of economics at the University of Brasilia. Mr. Barbosa previously served as Brazil's Minister of Planning and Minister of Finance. His academic and professional background reflects a strong commitment to public policy, economic development, and institutional strengthening. A great pleasure to have you here, Mr. Barbosa. Please take your seat. The last but not least, I think most of us know our chief economist, Mr. Erik Berkelhoff. Erik is the bank's inaugural chief economist, sets the vision and strategy for the economics departments of AIIB, and he leads the planning, implementation, and supervision of its work plan in support of banks' mandates. Prior to joining AIIB in September 2020, Eric served as the director of the Institute of Global Affairs, London School of Economics, and the chief economist of European Bank for Reconstruction and Development from 2006 to 2015, where he was part of the creating and co-lead of Vienna Initiative, a European crisis response team credited with mitigating the impact of 2008 global financial crisis. Thank you, Eric, to have your time to support us. Now, my name is Guoping Zhang. I'm a principal investment solutions specialist working at the sectors, themes, and financial solutions department at the bank. I'm also co-lead the climate and nature team. So it's my really great pleasure to serve and assist this distinguished panel and also to you to discuss a very important topic. Our goal today is to explore the vital role of the nature and biodiversity in sustainable development. Understanding how important, how multilateral development banks, private sectors, and governments can work together to finance and implement the sustainable projects. When facing the twin crises, the climate change crisis and the loss of biodiversity. In the era where the urgency of protecting nature and biodiversity has never been greater, the adoption of the Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework at the COP15 marked as a crucial step forward. Financing the protection of nature and biodiversity is not just an environmental imperative, but it is fundamental for human well-being and economic sustainability. We believe MDBs, like AIIB, have a pivotal role to play in mobilizing resources and shifting towards nature-positive economies, recognizing that we human beings have to live with nature and our projects must work with nature. We are now seeing the evolvement from a do no harm model to a nature-positive investment paradigm. As a signatory of the joint statement by MDBs on nature, people, and planet, AIIB is taking every effort to mainstream nature into our investment operations. Today, we bring together the global experts and stakeholders to explore how we can effectively finance nature and biodiversity within the context of sustainable infrastructure investments. So our goal in the next hour is that we are inviting our distinguished speakers to explore the role of MDBs in leveraging financial resources to promote nature-positive investments and the practical application of nature-based solutions in infrastructure development, and also opportunities and challenges in scaling up finance and nature and biodiversity, including how we're going to mobilize private capital. Lastly, that we also would like to see how we can foster collaboration and knowledge sharing across governments, MDBs, private sector, and civil society in this space. Again, it's a privilege that we have this distinguished panel and with us today. We are very much looking forward to inspiring discussions. So without further ado, let's move very quickly to the panel discussion. I would like to start first to kick it off, to asking questions to Ms. Steentje van Helthoven. Now, excuse me. The first question to you, Mr. Steentje. How do you see the role of nature-based solutions evolving in global infrastructure development, particularly in emerging markets or economies?
Thank you so much, and first of all, it's a great honor and a pleasure to be here. in the country of the Kunming Declaration, I think setting the scene for all of us. And I think this bank is such an incredible bank as part of a global fabric of multilateral development banks that are playing a crucial role in actually changing the course of how we look at the development of our world. Now, traditionally, people see nature and infrastructure as two very different things, but they are one and the same. Nature is infrastructure. And I think if we actually take one step back and we look at nature, we have to realize that we are nature. Nature is who we and what we are. And the protection and the investment, therefore, in nature-based infrastructure is also the investment in ourselves. Now, the World Resources Institute has a strategy that is based on 3 pillars: people, climate, and nature at the same time. So in everything that we do, we look at all 3 factors because they are inseparable. And of course, we have been developing and discovering, I think, over time, also how investing in nature is actually also investing in climate. A recent report that the World Resources Institute brought out has also shown that, for example, even investing in adaptation through nature-based solutions in actually 75% of the cases is also mitigation, because nature serves us in so many ways. Since we have, I think, all been experiencing much more critical nature events and extreme weather events, I think here in China you have, and I came in on the plane this morning and I read in the newspaper that you are already expecting to see the days of the dogs, I think it was mentioned in the paper, now in June, whereas normally that would only be in the middle of the summer. My very last day in government, which you mentioned that I was in, I was actually planning to have a goodbye meeting with my staff, thanking them for all that they had done for me. I had to cancel all of that because of one big rain shower that flooded both the south of the Netherlands as a part of Germany and a part of Belgium. I had to take off my shoes, put on my boots, and go down to a village to see how bridges were swept away and how elderly people were evacuated from an elderly house in the back of a truck because of this one big rain shower. This was because of a lack of investment in the infrastructure in a way that works with nature, not against nature. And we as the Netherlands, we have experience in working with nature, in reflecting on how to manage water. But the development of our climate means that we are all facing new challenges again. Our big rivers, our protection through the big rivers held because of that one rain shower, but these were smaller rivers we had not anticipated. The climate change is posing new threats to all of us. And I think a very big lesson learned is we need to make sure that we involve nature in the way we finance our development, or we will be facing higher costs. Now, WRI is working on this, of course, across the world. We integrate nature in all that we do. And of course, I would not do my colleagues justice if I would not briefly show this report, the partnership on biodiversity financing, in partnership also with your bank and many other partners, even also here on the stage. We need to come together and share the knowledge, share the results of how we do this effectively. Because not all banks are yet used to integrating this in every way. We have to share the knowledge. We have to share standards, develop standards to facilitate these kind of investments. So there's lots of things that need to be done. And I think infrastructures also like the bank are critical for this. WRI is also supporting the finance standard here with the Bank of China. We are bringing out reports on adaptation and how to integrate nature in adaptation. So we try to bring our research and the experience that we see in all of these developing countries on how they can drive their development through nature-based investments. And I know that Brazil is here, so I'm not going to go into wonderful work in Brazil because we have the real specialist here. But I think one thing is very clear. We are nature, and therefore investing in nature is investing in ourselves. We can no longer overlook the big impact that our development so far has had on nature, and it's starting to erode the very basis for us to develop. So the time is here and now to make sure that we recognize nature as an infrastructure, and we start combining the investments every time, and for that we need to come together, all of us, share knowledge, develop the research, and share the findings. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Stintje. This is really a good start. You touch a very central point that actually we are part of nature. We are nature. If you talk about biodiversity, even myself, sometimes talking with my colleagues, you see the different people, and that's part of the biodiversity. So, yes, indeed, you have the Dutch experience and Dutch lessons learned, so that we are investing in infrastructure, even up to now, investing in infrastructure is not yet enough, but we have to reflect that we have to do more investments in nature as part of the infrastructure. That's a very a big point and a good start. Now, following that, I have the second question for you. How can international organizations and governments balance the need for rapid, infrastructure development with the biodiversity protection? Because as you just already very much pointed out, that both investing in nature, infrastructure is not sufficient yet. Investment in nature is even far behind. So how do you see the balance between the two?
Thank you very much. And I can disclose to the audience that I just learned before coming to this panel that you studied in Delft. So I know that you've witnessed some of the situation in the Netherlands very, very firsthand. And I actually live very close to Delft. So we've shared some of the same environment, and we've seen some of the same challenges also in that part of the Netherlands. An economy will always react to the incentives and the frameworks and the structure in place. And the current incentives, frameworks, and policies in place do not yet reflect sufficiently the importance of investing in nature at the same time as investing in climate and infrastructure. And so if we want to change how the market behaves, and if we want to change how economic partners behave, we have to change the setting for them, we have to change the incentives. And it actually means that we have to start integrating the global commons more in the way that we structure our economies. When I used to give presentations about this, I would usually have one slide that was empty. And there would always be a nervous secretary coming up to me and saying, oh, there's an empty slide in your presentation. And I would say, no, that is the most important slide in a presentation, because that is the invisible hand of Adam Smith. But it doesn't work for the global commons. We need to make that hand visible. We need to make those global commons visible. And so what we have to do is we have to develop policies, regulations, and technical guidance to help infrastructure developers, financial institutions implement NBS integrations effectively and consistently. It's not about one project here, one project there. It is about changing the very way we do things. It's about aligning infrastructure-related NBS opportunities also with those global commitments that we've made, such as the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, but also it needs to become part of how we set our nationally determined contributions, and of course all of that aligned towards the SDGs. We have to also make sure that we support financial innovation, and I'm sure we're going to be talking much more about this on the panel here today, to scale up investments in NBS integrated infrastructure. Think blended finance, think guarantees, think outcome-based mechanisms. WRI is even working with a lot of partners to create nature as an asset class. I think this is kind of innovation in how we use all of the bright minds in the financial sector. We know how to create financial structures, we know how to create financial products for even things which are completely virtual, so as the new virtual art. We have to be able to create those financial products that will help us to protect what is the most physical that we have, which is our planet and our nature. Of course, we also have to promote infrastructure designs that integrate NBS to minimize negative effects on ecosystems and biodiversities. And again, when I was on the plane, and I'm sure I'm not going to get the name right, but I read about a long road through one of the biggest moving deserts that was protected by a green belt on either side of the road to protect it against the sands from the desert. We could also have built a wall. We could have put more concrete there. But nature actually is probably in many aspects the most efficient solution that's out there. Nature is so incredibly efficient. The more we learn from nature, the more we use those mechanisms that nature has developed over millennia of years, the more efficient actually we will be. And I think also in China, our China team has also been collaborating on investing in a couple of the pilots. Think about Wuhan, think about the mangroves. Nature-based solutions often are better, derive more benefits across a wider scale. We just have to make sure that we start looking at them more and that we start creating the financial incentives and the financial structures that will enable us to reap those longer-term benefits for those short-term problems that we have. And I think that's the challenge that we all face here together. Thank you.
Thank you, Stintje. This is really good insights and also inspiring. And you touch upon quite wide range of the very issues. If I'm correctly picking up your point, the very big point is we need to have a paradigm shift. And we have to think a different, the way that we used to do, and now in a different way, that integrate nature as part of financial solutions. Another point is that we need to have incentives for finance in nature. So following on that, and also talk about some of the challenges. Following on that, I would like to move to my next speaker, Ms. Rachel. So the first question to you is that, as an expert in conservation, what role do you see the private sector is scaling up investments for nature-positive infrastructure? And how can MDBs partner effectively with the private players to mobilize these funds? We see that the public funds are always in shortage. And while at the same time, there's no lack of money over there. So how we can mobilize this private sector participation, but at the same time, to have a good incentive so that they are willing to invest in nature. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. I'm very honored to be next to Stintje from WRI. I used to be a WRIer before, and it's an honor to be here with you. So I will talk from the point of view of someone who is a lawyer but has spent most of the time working with nature in my career, so more than 30 years now. And now I have the privilege of working for Conservation International. And we've been hearing throughout the last couple of years, now that we realize that we are at this tipping point of many ecosystems and many climate tipping points, that we need to do the right accounting for nature. Nature is the basis of the economy, is infrastructure, as Stintje was saying here. And we have not figured out a way to incorporate and to account for nature in our economies. And we don't have much more time. We have, in the academia, found many, many ways by which we could do it. It's a matter of making it happen, right? And because the costs are being, we're paying a big toll for not having done it yet. So Stintje mentioned the floodings in the Netherlands. We had a very bad flooding in Brazil very recently that almost destroyed the economy of a whole, one of our biggest economies in the country. And we're seeing that all over the place in the world. And private sector plays a key role, even more so these days when we think that what used to be international cooperation, or what used to be bilateral aid, what used to be development assistance is no longer. We have seen the exit of USAID from the world, basically, and the ripple effect that has caused. And that is calling for more creativity, and it's calling more for private sector engagement. And at Conservation International, we've been working from the beginning with private sector. We're not a traditional NGO in the sense that we do the work with civil society, but we have always partnered with private sector to test and innovate some financial mechanisms. And one example I want to bring for you has to do with Asia and also in Latin America. And that is engaging through protection of mangroves. We understood that mangroves are one of the most important ecosystems to be preserved. And for AIIB, it's an important topic because AIIB is also dedicating to find creative solutions for natural infrastructure. And we found that mangroves are responsible, that they hold more carbon than other forests, 4 times more carbon than tropical forests. And they hold it in the roots of the mangrove trees. And there are mangrove forests all over the globe. And Brazil, my country, happens to have a very good part of it and very well preserved. So with private sector, we are working with tourism, aquaculture, fisheries, in a blended finance way, so that they pay part of the bill, Multilateral cooperation is paying part of the bill, and we are connecting civil society into those efforts in a win-win way where we are doing the conservation and the restoration of mangroves. The communities who live in the mangroves are benefiting from being able to promote fisheries, and that's economy, that's poverty alleviation, and that's supply of food. And the private sector can get returns from the aquaculture, and the banks will get the returns from the loans that the private sector gets. So it's one example how nature is in the basis of the economy. And why is it infrastructure? Because for AIIB, infrastructure is the focus, right? And then it is infrastructure because it is holding the impacts from rising sea, from the big storms. Mangroves are an element of the protection for coastal communities. And I just want to bring you this image because it's one very clear example of how private sector and other sectors can work together. Also, when we mention the different tipping points that we are facing in this planet, melting of ice sheets in Antarctica and the Arctic, the Amazon risking being transformed into a savanna, and the collapse of the Atlantic Ocean currents, these are major infrastructures that are at risk because of the model, of the economic model we have developed. How can we still address this? Yes, we can. We're going to be having the 30th meeting of the Convention on Climate Change in Brazil this year in the Amazon. And I just wanted to bring another example of nature as infrastructure and how important it is for business and for private sector. The Amazon is a water pump. It's not only a forest that is holding tons and tons of carbon. It's a water pump that is supporting the economy of South America. And the economy of South America is agriculture-based and is feeding a good part of the world. Brazil is the 3rd biggest food producer in the world. A lot of that food comes to Asia and to China in particular. So nature is business. There wouldn't be agriculture in the southern part of Brazil or southern part of South America if the Amazon was not there. And we are not accounting for that in our national accounts, in our business models, in our financial structure. And it is time we do so. And right now, the way the Amazonian countries are trying to promote the conservation of the Amazon is trying to find businesses. And we need the private sector to incorporate that opportunity for the returns on investment. There's no other way we will save all the nature that we still need to be conserved if we don't partner with private sector in business models. The exit of the international cooperation model or the destruction of that system begs for business models that will incorporate nature in its basis. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Rachel. And really that's your experience and practices of working with the private sector is the learning actually for us to say nature is a business. We can use nature, particularly those important ecosystems. They do provide ecosystem services, which can generate the benefits at large as a whole, but at the same time, they generate revenue, particularly for private sector. If they invest on nature, then they do have the return. So that is, we call it incentives. This is the first incentive. They do see that there's a business return. So, and at the same time, I can hear from you that we need a blended finance, so that it's also, I can see this also part of the investments, so that we can attract the investors into this space. Now, thank you very much for that. And then the second question to you is that, in your opinion, what are the most significant barriers to scaling nature-positive projects, and how can this be addressed through a better collaboration between governments, MDBs, and private sector?
So going to the point you just raised on incentives, we have created a model of incentives that is no longer compatible with fighting climate change or avoiding the big biodiversity crisis that we see coming up. So we need to reform policies all over the world. In many countries are already doing that and are way ahead. And we have learned in the past 20 years that what used to be a dream now it's a major business, which is solar and wind power, very much in the heart of what AIIB does, right? AIIB chose climate change to be the focus of its operation. And we can see how it's growing in the power sector. The same needs to take place for nature. We need to create those models, and it's very easy to see in my country. Brazil is an agriculture powerhouse, but the incentives for the agriculture are not incorporating nature. The incentives are for types of businesses that are not accounting for the water they use or the soil that is being overused. So we need to change the signal. It's an economic incentive. So if we manage to, and we've been trying that in our Congress there, if we manage to create the investments, right, the big amount of money that government puts in the agriculture, maybe Nelson will mention that later because he represents a very important bank in our part of the world. If we change the signal through a policy by which that big agriculture country starts to protect nature, to have food, to feed the world, it will work. It's a win-win. So the incentives is easy to see. What we have now are perverse incentives, that agriculture now consumes a lot of nature and destroys a lot of nature. So, and the resources are being put towards that. So we need to change that. Other barriers I would like to say, and a very difficult one is the short-term returns. We live in a world where short-term returns is the rule. And I would like to mention and really celebrate the fact that we are in China, civilization that we learn that thinks long-term. And learning from China perhaps is what can help us think 50, 100,000 years from now, because that's the only way we're going to avoid those tipping points. And the short-termism of our economy is at the center, the heart of the barriers we need to overcome. Another barrier, but I think we are more and more getting there, is the gaps in blended finance. We will only get where we need to overcome this crisis if public money, private money, philanthropy money, all are leveraging each other at the level that we need. And there are others, but I don't want to go on and on because I know there are other people to add here. So thank you.
Thank you very much. I think that's both Stenche and you mentioned about the importance of having the policy in place, which is very big in the topic about saying that's enabling environment. And that is a very point that we have this, guiding policy so that the investors could come in to invest in nature. And another reflection, I quickly say that both Stenche and you mentioned about the think about the short-term and long-term return. Indeed, currently there's a big barrier. People do not see immediate return. That's make people are hesitant to invest in nature. And Stintje all mentioned about Dutch experience and in old history in the Netherlands that you built the dikes, actually not really the artificial concrete dikes, but really sand dunes, right? The dike. Actually in China, we also have this 1,000 years ago. Yesterday in another session, I mentioned about that. I would say the first very prominent nature-based solution, that is the natural irrigation gate. Actually, the building on these natural rocks. During the wet season, the flood season, actually automatically divert the water from the mainstream to the channels to irrigate millions of hectares of the farmland and also to benefit the millions of people. That's long-term return we see now today. If we could have a time machine, we can go back that I'm not sure whether people like, we are sitting here, but we would invest in that. Thank you very much. And let me move to Mr. Nelson. So you are working as in a very important public development bank. So we would like to hear from you your experience. So how does your bank invest and integrate nature-based solutions and biodiversity in your projects, particularly in your country with such rich biodiversity?
Well, first, I'd like to thank the AIIB for the invitation to be here. And it's also very challenging to participate in this session. When I got the invitation, I asked my team, is there an easier topic? Because biodiversity is a very difficult topic. We are facing many challenges at the BNDES, the Brazilian National Development Bank, now, in how to measure that. Brazil is a large country, so it has many biomes. For those who are not very familiar, we have 6 large land biomes. The most famous one is the Amazon forest, but we also have an Atlantic forest. And that's where most of the actions usually focus, because 50% of the Brazilian emissions comes from deforestation. So if we improve land use and reduce deforestation, start recovering forests, we will practically meet the Paris guidelines very easily. But there are other 4 biomes, which do not necessarily capture a lot of carbon, but they are very important for biodiversity. We have what we call the Pampa biome, which is a low grass environment in the south of Brazil. We have the Pantanal, which is a wet land in the middle of Brazil. We have the Caatinga, which is a dry land in the northeast of Brazil. And we have the most affected one is the Brazilian savanna, where most of our crop is produced. It's called Cerrado. In the forest, in either the Atlantic or the Amazon, it's not easy to control, it's not easy to monitor, but we know how. There's well-known technology, you have satellite monitoring, you have all the technology, so it's easy to integrate in the policies. In the other biomes, it's more challenging. And what we have been doing is discussing how do we measure that? How do we measure biodiversity? I am an economist, so I'm biased for this. So in economics, you know, if you want to monitor, you must measure that. If you can measure, you can monitor. If you can monitor, you can price it or you can regulate it. For emissions, we already know how to do that. We have an emissions calculator, we monitor land use, so we integrate that in our policies. BNDES is one of the larger provider of funds for the Brazilian agribusiness sector, and all our finances, they are all the producers and firms that got our lending, they must attend to the land use requirements of the Brazil. And there's a bi-weekly monitoring through satellites. And if it's detected that they're not using land properly, their finance is immediately stopped. And they have to pay fines, not only to us, but also to the environmental authorities. But when we go into wildlife or biodiversity that is more than emissions, that's the challenge. And the way we're trying to do that, not only in the Amazon and the Atlantic forest, but in the other biomes, is to try to measure that in area. How much you're recovering, areas, or how much you're going to compensate in investing in degraded lands if you're going to use some amount of area for your products. We have recently tried to integrate biodiversity in our policies. This I did not bring because it's still in Portuguese, but we have a biodiversity report where we try to measure how our policies meet the 23 targets of the Kunming-Montreal framework on biodiversity. They're very varied. There are many ways to measure that, but you have to start somewhere. And we have been starting by integrating area measurement and area impact in all of our finances.
Thank you very much, Nelson. You touched the really pain points about the measuring, monitoring and measuring, let alone the nature and the biodiversity, how can to monitor and measure the biodiversity, and also with these appropriate indicators and targets. But same as a bank, AIIB, we have so many invest in so many projects in different sectors. We always have to look at how to make our project more sustainable in a way that we can monitor and measure. That is, we have to build our results framework over there. That's also very difficult, even for the traditional projects. Now, if we move to this space, we completely can imagine how difficult it could be. But you have already started, and probably we have more to learn from you. And again, you touch upon the policies. You already started, setting up your national policies on the biodiversity. And of course, there's a lot of challenges over there. But I hope that you can set the role model for the whole world so that we can learn from there. And my second question to you is that what best practice from Brazil or other emerging economies would you recommend for mainstreaming nature and biodiversity into infrastructure investments? And how can these lessons be shared with the global stakeholders to ensure more widespread adoption? Again, we would like to learn more from you.
Okay. Well, first of all, the measurement, monitoring of land use. That is crucial for biodiversity. So in our finances, we integrate that. It's a condition for to be met in every operation. The other monitoring that we do in all infrastructure projects, they have to have the environmental licenses. They usually tackle many aspects, including biodiversity. In some areas, the regulation is already there. So the question is really to ensure that the regulation is being met. But in some areas, we have to create new regulation. And we have to invest in the certifying, in the measurement of biodiversity. I like to give concrete examples of the challenges. Brazil is the second fastest country in expanding solar and wind power generation after China. Most of these new power plants are being built in the Brazilian Northeast, in the Caatinga biome, the dry lands. They use a lot of area, and they cause a lot of degradation. Up until 2 years ago, there was no compensation required. So now we're starting to require that the firms have to compensate. And first they have to move some to areas that do not pose a great environmental risk, but if they do, they will have to invest and compensate in the same biome. So this is something new. Since we are the largest source of finance in domestic currency for these kinds of projects, we have the power to induce that. Rachel was mentioned the mangrove forests, which are very important as well, but has been not very well looked by public policy. We're also now trying to include that specific projects to restore or to maintain mangrove forests based on their intrinsic value for regulation or from the potential of carbon credits that can be generated from that biome. And here we face one challenge as well, because most of the certification of carbon emissions in the world today is done by 4 firms. all of them in Europe and in the US. There's nothing wrong with that. They can do their businesses. But they're not very, how can I say, experts in tropical land. So we face a bottleneck in terms, as a bottleneck, we want to generate a lot of carbon credits, but they don't have the fast processing capability in face of the demand and the importance of the topic. And most of the technologies or the experts are more focused on temperate forests, which is okay for their main activity. But the Brazilian government is trying to get together with other tropical countries to develop certifying agencies or institutions, private, but specialized in tropical biomes. With that, we will be able to implement our policies much better and to include all these requirements in our finances.
Thank you very much, Nelson. I see that there's a very big, or say very important aspect you already touched upon when talking about the nature and the biodiversity. That is about compensation, right? We have been, I think that's many practitioners or institutions already practice these the payment for ecosystem compensation. That is already quite some cases over there. I hope that in your country, with your policy in place, that could really drive that advance in that area, and so that showcase how we can really do more in that area. So thank you very much again. I would like to move to our last but not least, actually very important speaker, Eric. You are the driving force at the bank to provide thought leadership. So, the previous, our flagship report is on nature as infrastructure. So we have this opportunity to listen to you again, to have your insights. So that my first question to you, as the chief economist, how do you see AIIB align its financial models with the nature and the biodiversity preservation, especially in the context of large infrastructure projects?
Well, thank you, and thank you for including me in this panel of so much experience in this space. So what we had in mind, and you know, the pleasure of working in a place like AIIB is that you don't just think these things, but there are actually people, colleagues that are really trying to implement this in the field, and that is what makes my life rewarding and my team's life rewarding. So when we thought about nature's infrastructure, we thought, of course, of nature as, you know, the most important infrastructure sustaining life on Earth, and you know, it's something that we have to invest in, we have to manage, and that we have to make more resilient. But there's also another side to this, which is already touched on here. It is that, you know, we have in infrastructure finance a lot of tools that we can use for investing in nature. And Nelson mentioned, the measuring problem of biodiversity. It's a very real one, but I think we shouldn't also make it, an impediment to action here, because there are many different measures, and we can, adding them up or weighing them or using one of them. I think we will still be in a better world if we apply these measures. But so what we have done, and maybe I should mention also one thing which I think is very important, was Stinchi was talking about, the bringing people. So in the next flagship that we launched early this year, we talked about planetary health, and it was very much about bringing in people into this calculation and looking at the human health impact of what's happening to our climate, what's happening due to nature laws, and also using health and using the effect on people to generate climate action and generate nature action. So I think keeping people in mind is very important. So what have we done? Well, in that report, actually, we take one of the projects in our pipeline. It's a flood management project in Mongolia. That the idea was to use a wetland to manage floods for a local community. And what we could do, and we didn't actually need any additional data because all the data we needed were in the environmental assessment for this project. So what we did was say, let's look at all the ecosystem services that this wetland provides, and then see how does the project look after that. So we looked at the carbon capture capacity of wetlands. We know wetlands are very effective in capturing carbon. We looked at the air purification, the water purification, the cross-pollination, the recreation, and so on. And when we started adding this up, the value of this wetland was much greater than if we just focused on the flood management part, which is very important, of course, as well. And once you start looking at that, actually the conclusion was we should make this wetland restoration bigger, and it's worth it. But this is for a local authority; they can. All these things matter to them. So that's just one example, and we can take that methodology, which is basically it's a standard cost-benefit analysis, but amplified by looking at a natural capital valuation. We can take that to another project we have now it's actually a mangrove. It's a river estuary in the south of China. We can apply that methodology, and again, that project is going to look very different. We are also applying it now in our crisis response to the Rio Grande do Sul flooding. We want to, as part of our crisis response, we're doing something to help restore those ports that were damaged, but also trying to address the problem into the future, looking at how can we use nature to manage flooding in the upstreams in these rivers, and we very much want to use the same enhanced cost-benefit analysis. Again, Brazil, we are talking a lot about Brazil here. We have our first standalone climate policy-based financing in Brazil. It's under discussion. I shouldn't say too much about it, but what's very important for this discussion here is that this policy-based financing, and all of us has mentioned the need to think about policy when you talk about nature and nature investment. Through the policy-based framework, we can start talking about how can we improve the policy context for nature investment. And one component of our loan is going to be working on exactly on the mangroves in Brazil, looking at their capacity to bind carbon, but also looking at the other benefits that come from these mangroves. We had yesterday a signing of a letter of intent for a project using commercial banks in China, 2 commercial banks as financial accelerators of climate or nature investment. And I think that's a very important potential source of funding. If we can get standard commercial banks to be able to evaluate nature as infrastructure, if we can give incentives, as in China we have this eco-compensation scheme, if we can put these things together and use the financial system to roll out investment in nature as infrastructure, I think that is very much the future.
Thank you, Eric. Yes, indeed, the bank AIIB has one of the 4 thematic priorities. One is the private capital mobilization. We have our targets, and yesterday that signing of the MOU is one example how the bank is moving really fast into that space to not only just mobilize the capital or private capital for investing in different sectors, but also in nature. So that's really a good example of course, the bank has different tools and instruments to support that financing in nature. And now, again, financing nature positive infrastructure often involves trade-offs between economic growth and conservation goals. So I use the trade-offs because there's a lot of debates. People still often do not see immediate return, right? There are some risks, particularly for private sector. So how, from your perspective, how can MDBs ensure this investment remain financially viable while ensuring the co-benefits of protecting ecosystem and biodiversity?
Yeah, so I think I already gave several examples of why we shouldn't think of this so much as a trade-off. You know, these values that I mentioned when it comes to natural capital in the Mongolia project, these are real values, they have economic content. This is about sustainable economic growth. So I would not emphasize too much on these trade-offs. It's really more about how can we get the financial system to value properly these natural assets. How can we get, you know, this is both for countries, you know, so Brazil has huge assets when it comes to natural capital. How can we get markets to actually properly value these? How can, you know, for many emerging and developing economies, these are huge opportunities to get access to capital at lower cost, you know, at getting capital that otherwise would not perhaps be available into these economies, reducing their debt levels. There are a number, you know, Rachel's organization have been involved in many transactions trying to do debt for nature swaps, for example. These are the type of thinking that I think will show that these trade-offs are not, you know, it's not really about a trade-off there. It's about sustainable growth. And you know, again, nature as infrastructure is about, nature is the foundation for all economic activity. We cannot forget that. I was given today, I was sent a few days ago from Stinch's organization a very interesting handbook on nature finance, and I really recommend that for reading. We are also working together with the African Development Bank, the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, and the Paulson Institute on a publication for the Belém. Again, Brazil is at the center of everything here. For Belém, where we look at the most difficult thing is to get the private sector finance into nature. And what we are doing is we're looking at how can we use biodiversity credits? How can we find, you know, there are some principles now, and Nelson alluded to some of them, you know, established by the International Advisory Panel of Biodiversity. How can we get these principles applied and use that to get biodiversity credits used? How can we use guarantees? How can we use insurance industry? How can we use this financial accelerator model that I mentioned before, you know, using commercial banks? And finally, how can we use the PPP model, you know, the public-private partnership? You know, these, almost for everything we're thinking about here, there has to be a public component, you know, some regulation, some compensation schemes, and then we need to get the private sector in and get the innovation capacity of the private sector involved. And we hope to present, or we will present this report in Belém, and then we hope that we can work with the other multilateral development banks and the national development banks on this agenda, because that is absolutely critical. If we don't get the private sector involved, it's not going to happen.
Thank you, Eric. That's very good insight. That indeed, that we should move away from this talking about the trade-offs, but really to take the nature as a asset class, and then people see the value, see the return, either short-term or long-term. So very good. Thank you so much. Because of time, I would like to quickly move to the last round of questions to all of you with one question. Everyone has just same one question. So we talked already quite a lot this important key points, like we need policies, we need regulations, we need standards, and we need tools, innovation. In finance, in financial solutions in terms of innovative instruments, but also we need monitoring and measuring and monitoring. And how can the price the biodiversity or nature and biodiversity? So now, all in all, we need collective action, and we need to learn from each other. And then, my last question to all of you: how do we collaborate together to build a partnership and share the knowledge from your perspective?
Thank you. And let me say, if I may, just want to come back on this point of the trade-offs, because I loved what Eric said about the trade-offs. I think it really is only defined by the lens through which we look at it. And I would even say, being a bit provocative, if we look at it over a longer term lens, the trade-offs are just the other way around. Destroying nature is bad for the economy. People thrive and work much better in a clean environment. Their health is much better in a clean environment. A healthy sea will generate much more fish. And a well-tended field will generate more food. So we only talk about trade-offs because we look at a very narrow time frame. And that's coming to your question, it's about not just overcoming the short and the long term, but also split incentives. There's different partners, the cost and benefits fall to different partners, but in the end we all win or we all lose. And so one of the other elements that we need to get smarter about is how do we bring those partnerships together to overcome those split incentives. And I'd like to give two examples. One is actually one here in China, the Wuhan Sponge City project, which aimed to reduce flooding through green infrastructure like green roofs, retention tanks and wetlands. Everybody immediately understands why this would help and why this would be a good idea, but how do you actually get this done? Because the cost and the benefits fall to different parts. So my colleagues here in China, in the WRI China, they first of all estimated that the total net benefits of this would be 16.5 billion yuans over 30 years. So the business case is already there, but the challenge is how to package it. So the recommendation was to, on the one hand, develop an incentive mechanism to encourage rainwater collection or create trust funds that could blend finance from both public and private capital. Make sure that real estate developers create this element of, let's say, that green sponge city where you know that your water will be well managed as part of how they also sell and develop, design their properties and put them on the market. But also the local government to provide incentives for those kind of investments to be made, because they in the end will have a lower bill in their overall water management infrastructure. Now, packaging these kind of private and public incentives into one longer term management of our natural ecosystem is how we can bring the short and the long term together. And that is the kind of innovation that we need, and that is why we need all these different partners to come together. Another example is, if you look at our cities are heating up across the world, and they're heating up a lot. And this is impacting people enormously, especially the more vulnerable people. The way we manage our traffic has a big impact. We're all experiencing that. The way we manage our traffic and the way we design our cities for our traffic and for green spaces has a big impact on how our cities heat up. And so if we choose differently, if we choose to invest differently, if we start building parks more than car parks and coupling that with more public transport and more safe, active mobility, we can actually create and refine our cities to become cities that are livable for 70 to 80% of the world population that will be living in cities towards 2050. We have a huge responsibility there. We have a huge infrastructural development and investment upcoming. And the choices we make today will define how people will live in those cities in a changed climate. Now, I think sometimes it may seem difficult, but I'm going to give our report one more chance. I think learning from each other is a way to scale up. This is one report. There are, of course, many. Let's make sure that we bring our knowledge together. Bringing our knowledge together is the fastest way to scale. And that is, I think, a responsibility we all have. Let's learn, let's do research, let's share it, let's actively try to find each other, build those coalitions, and try to speed up and scale up, because that is what is urgently needed, not just for nature, not just for climate, mostly for people, because the climate can survive without us, but we will have a hard time living well in a changing climate with a destroyed nature. And that is the responsibility that we can all tackle here together as from today. Thank you.
Thank you, Stintje. Now, Rachel?
Hard to follow Stintje now, but I want to tell you a story about how our two organizations have worked together with a lot of success, very collaboratively, and not only the two organizations, WRI and CI, but many others. The case is the Bogota supply of water. And there's a methodology that WRI has developed to quantify the cost of water production, if you will, water supply. We, on the other hand, as a think tank, WRI has developed this methodology, has applied in many cities around the world, many countries. We, on the other hand, CI, we are a do tank, very much on the field. We have been working in the Bogota region to save the Paramos biome. And that is a very important conservation site because it collects the water from the rain, the water drains, and then it supplies the water to the cities. So with the knowledge from WRI and the action on the ground from CI, we managed to work in a collective way with many municipalities, including the Bogota municipality. We went to the Green Climate Fund, and they are willing to support the work of protecting that green infrastructure that is collecting the water, guaranteeing the quality of the water. And where's the beauty? Where's the economics? So WRI has this methodology that proves that you save a lot of money by not needing to treat the water, because the water that is coming from the Paramos has less sediments. It's cleaner, so you don't have to use so much chemicals. It makes it much cheaper than building the gray infrastructure, the water treatment, and adding all those chemicals to clean the water. So that ended in one big win-win that is helping with the supply of water for businesses and for the city of Bogota. So a very concrete collaboration. I want to bring two other ones. One is very nascent. It's called the Pan-Amazonian Bioeconomy Network, another partnership between WRI and CI, but with many other organizations. We are 30 organizations now. And what does it have to do with infrastructure? I was saying that Amazon is the big water pump. It's the big infrastructure that is guaranteeing the climate regulation in a good part of the world. We cannot lose the Amazon. If we lose the Amazon, there's no climate stability. It's one of those, it's like the ocean. The ocean has been guaranteeing life on Earth for so long, and it's been stocking so much carbon, same with the Amazon. And where do I want to get with that network? We realized that the Amazon is protected by around 2 million people, the custodians of the Amazon. They're indigenous. They have lived there forever. There are more nations in the Amazon alone than in the United Nations. The Amazon has 511 indigenous nations. They speak more than 300 languages. This is not known to many people. We realized, as a community of environment and economists, that if we help the economy of those people, they will stay in the forest and they will protect the forest instead of fleeing to the cities, which is a trend in the Amazon. Now, 70% of the population of that region is already in cities. So we cannot lose those native people, traditional people. If they leave, we will not have the guardians. They are the real rangers, right? But they need an economy because they are under the poverty line. More than 50% of the people who live in the Amazon region are under the poverty line. So how do we make all of those things build together? We created this network. We are sharing knowledge. We are sharing knowledge specifically about the bioeconomies. And the infrastructure that big biome offers will be the one that will guarantee that economy, the economy that is based on 20 or 30 commodity products. And the last example I wanted to give you, also nascent, is the Global Mangrove Alliance. That is present in more than 30 countries. It's a collection of almost 100 organizations, and they got together to help save the mangroves of the world because of the climate crisis, because there's so much carbon stocked in the mangrove. They realized if we don't do that, we will not win the climate battle. And that's another example of sharing knowledge, collaborative, that generates economies. And the mangrove per se, as I was saying before, is a big example of nature infrastructure. So it's win-win. And examples like this exist, many of them. So thank you.
Thank you. So, Nielsen.
Well, I will give 3 examples of what we have been doing in Brazil that may be useful. Regarding grants, project preparation, and concessional loans. In Brazil, there's this fund called the Amazon Fund. It was created by the government to receive international donations. But it's a fund that is managed by BNDES. So there you have one type of project. You have a grant fund with private or government donations managed by a federal institution. And that gives more security for the donors and increases the efficiency in the use of funds. And with these funds, we support many initiatives like the Pan-Amazon network that Rachel was mentioning here. So maybe sometimes in developing countries, instead of having many small funds, it may be useful for you to centralize the management and keep the diversity in the application of the funds, in the network of NGOs and other agents that you work with. The Amazon Fund works with private firms, with subnational governments, but it has a unified standard of processing information, of the requirements that each project must attend to. In project preparation, BNDES also provides a lot of services for the government in preparing infrastructure projects, from reforestation to nuclear plants, including schools, including hospitals, and all that. And we have been including biodiversity conditions, if you will, in some of our projects. In Brazil, if you're going to build or operate a long road or highway, inevitably you're going to pass through a forest at some point. And we have been now introducing in the renewal of the concessions. Most of the concessions of highways were done 30 years in the past. There were no big environmental concerns at that point. But now they're coming to renewal. And the government is putting some requirements that have to build, for example, pathways for wildlife in most of them. You have to also to recover part of the areas in the vicinity of the roads. We prepare projects, we try to induce the recovery of degraded lands by using blended finance. The more a project recovers degraded land, the more of blended finance they will have. So that reduces the total cost. And we are also preparing large concessions of forest management in the Amazon. And in some of them, it also includes the recovery of degraded lands. And sometimes it's easier just to plant the same type of tree. But we also want biodiversity. So the requirements also impose that whoever wins the concession must actually build the biodiversity. It has to have a lot of kinds of vegetation to recover that. And most of that, from the seeds to the planting, are done by the indigenous population of the area. So in project preparation, you can also induce that. Third and most important, concessional loans. Every year there are many meetings where some people announce $100 billion this, $100 billion that. But the fact is that the money did not arrive yet. And that's why the Brazilian government in the third Lula administration decided to go on by itself. And President Lula, when he was in his second term, he created something called the Climate Fund, which is a domestic fund that gives concessional loans. And in his third administration, he scaled up that. So this funds, the Treasury borrows this money, puts in the fund, the BNDES manage that. The Treasury borrows at international rates, which are lower because it doesn't carry the exchange rate risk. We lend this money in Brazil in domestic currency, and the Treasury bears the exchange rate risk. With that, we are able to pass international rates in US dollars to the Brazilian domestic currency, cutting the cost of the project at least in half. And the Brazilian Treasury bears the exchange rate risk. Last year, the Treasury raised $2 billion. This year is going to raise $3 billion. And probably until the end of the Lula's third term, there are going to be $10 billion of Brazilian borrowing, Brazilian National Treasury, to do concessional loans to preserve the environment and also to assure a green and just transition.
Thank you. So, Eric, please.
Yes. No, so I already mentioned this initiative to try to bring together the MDBs on bringing in private capital into nature investment. So we're working there with the Paulson Institute, and again, we're going to try to form this coalition in Belém. So MDBs can work much more together on this, and there's a lot of opportunities. Also, I think we can work much more with the organizations that Stintje and Rachel represents. When we produced or were writing the Nature's Infrastructure report, I shared it with Fang Li, and she, shared it with WI's global network of 700 experts. No charge, just those experts are available. And we are very nervous often as MDBs to work with civil society organizations, but these are organizations with a lot of experience, a lot of knowledge, experts, and so on. We should work much more together on these things. When it comes to structuring, for example, debt for nature swaps, Rachel's organization is one of the leaders in thinking about that. We should work much more with the national development banks. These are, I think, the complementarity between the MDBs and the national development banks are extraordinary. We have an MOU with BNDES. Much of that is around forestry and the Amazon, and I think that's very much the future, and we should do more of that. Let me end with a little story, because I think it illustrates why we need to think about biodiversity, why we need to think about nature. We talked about putting economic and putting people at the center. So in this report that we did on planetary health, we mentioned this example of the vultures in India. These vultures, due to the this explosion of the use of a particular painkiller in cattle raising in India, over the course of 5 years, or over the course of 10 years, the population of vultures dropped by between 90 and 95% in much of India. There's a very good study now published in the top academic journal showing that over the course of 5 years, every year, 100,000 people, additional people died because of these disappearance of vultures. And what happened was that when these vultures were very effective scavengers, were replaced by much less effective scavengers that also became disease vectors in the local communities, and these carcasses of cattle lying around, spreading diseases. And of course, we talked about 100,000 deaths. You can imagine how many people fell ill, and this article also goes into how we can calculate the health costs of that. I think when we talk about the value of biodiversity and these keystone species, it's absolutely critical to think about people and the human health impact. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we have learned a lot from these very inspiring, insightful discussions. Because of time, I think that we could. I think that we don't have follow-up sessions here at this room. We could give like 4-5 minutes to the audience for 2 questions. Yes, please.
Thank you. Oh, sorry. Yeah. Hi, nice to meet you all. I'm He Zhijun, affiliated with the World Bank. So, Professor Bergloff, I'm deeply inspired by your vision of seeing nature as an infrastructure. So, the AIIB's push to transform the natural infrastructure into an investable asset class is transformative, yet biodiversity lacks unified metrics like carbon footprints. So, under your leadership, how is the natural capital assessment tool overcoming data barriers and bridging silos between ecologists, financiers, and governments? And as AIIB aligns all projects with biodiversity goals through its Nature Investment Plan, the NIP, similar to Paris Agreement alignment, are the instruments like debt for nature swaps like DNS being developed to offer private capital scalable, bankable, and risk return models? Thank you so much.
I think, Erika, you can start. If any other...
Yeah. No, as I said, for this example that I gave, the Inner Mongolia project, we actually had all the information we needed. We worked with a consulting company and a methodology that we had worked together with the EBRD to develop. That all the information, all the data we needed was in the environmental assessment itself. So yes, we had to do some additional calculations and so on, and we did that together with this consulting firm. So I think the methodology also now, we understand how to use it. We understand now how to use this information that we already have in a much more effective way. So I don't think, but I agree that there are still, we have metric problems, because if you want to make financial assets out of these and promise returns and measure implementation, we still have to work on the metric side. But for the cost-benefit analysis such, we have the tools and we have the data.
Can I comment one thing?
Yes, please,
Very
Rachel.
quickly, I love your question, and at the very end you mentioned debt for nature swaps. I think this is an instrument that was created perhaps 30 years ago or more. Our organization started with a debt for nature swap, Conservation International, in Bolivia in 1987. And this tool, or this instrument, has not been used as much as we would have liked. And it's a very powerful way to, connect the financial sector with the conservation efforts, generating good for humanity. And the difficulty there is to have the owner of the credit willing to get a smaller amount of payment, having someone buy that credit, have the country that is indebted be fiscally eligible to be, able to hold that transaction, and have a collective of environmental organizations available to be able to supervise how this money will be used. But more and more, I think it's a way that we can help bring big resources for conservation that will benefit businesses at the end and will benefit people. So I think it's time that we rescue that instrument and use it more and more for the sake of nature. Thank you for bringing the question.
Thank you. And one more quick question. Any? Oh, yes, please.
Hi, thank you. My name is Bing, and I'm the founder of an aerospace company. My company name is Endless Door, and what we are doing is we're a 100% private company, but what we are doing, we reserve the DNA of all the animals, plants, and also human beings in the outer space. So, and we already launched twice. So we already reserved some of them in the outer space, in 1,000 kilometers away above us. So I have a very quick question. We are private sector, we startups. At what kind of stage can rouse your attention and may have the support from these organizations? Thank you.
I think it's a very tough question. I think any of these panelists, anyone you would like to take it.
Just one more I want to add it because...
One question because of time, I'm sorry.
Yeah, just one background, 2017, when this is the seed vault in Norwegian. After 10 years, and they already got the water flood inside, not inside, at the entrance. So we think the earth is not so safe. So that's why we are thinking we should have a copy in the outer space, outside of the world. Yeah, that.
I took the microphone not because I have a perfect answer to your question, but because I was so inspired, and I actually had the great privilege of going to Svalbard with a team of scientists and saw the vault that was established there, when it was still very much in the snow and everything. And then indeed, only a couple of years later, we learned that it was already under threat, and it only shows how fast our climate is changing and how much we need innovation. And I think many organizations are trying to support innovation through multiple means. WRI is part of a partnership which is called Partnership for Growth, where we try also to see with a lot of other partners how we can support through that partnership innovative business that want to be part of the solution for combating climate change, protecting nature, and ensuring better lives for people, how they can be supported through that network. So maybe Partnership for Growth is something that you might want to take a look at. And it's not just WRI again. I think everything we do in partnership, mostly with a lot of people here also on the bench. But perhaps that is something that you might want to take a look at. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stenchi. This is a really good answer, actually. You save us. Okay. Thank you very much, the distinguished speakers here, and thank you all, audience over here. I think we run a little bit of time, but still, I think this is very worth of having this, very interactive discussions. And well, I cannot serve as one to wrap up, but I have my learnings here, and the one key takeaway for me is that we, as a human being, is part of the nature. We are in the nature, and whatever we are investing in is including investing in nature, is investing ourselves, investing the people, the planet, and for prosperity, shared prosperity. That's my takeaway. Of course, there's a lot of things need to be done, including setting up the policies, setting up the standards, and to have a common understanding. We need a really a changing of mindset, which is paradigm shift. However, in the same time, as AIIB is infrastructure-focused bank, we're investing in infrastructure, including nature, but we do have our focus. We focus on our mission. We drive our force, collaborating with all partners, with MDBs, think tanks, NGOs, governments, to achieve our goals. Thank you very much.